Good morning, everyone. Welcome to Faith Connect. First of all, I wanted to thank the many of you who helped out with Coldest Night of the Year. Our total is somewhere around, for all four cities, somewhere around $140,000 raised. So give yourself a hand. Yeah, that's really excellent. It's excellent. I get, that's the only announcement we have this morning. I get the opportunity to introduce our speaker today. I keep telling people our new CFO, but Walter's been with us for 6 months now. So I guess I better drop the new, yeah, it still feels new? Yeah, yeah. Well, you know, I thought I was doing a pretty good job of, you know, some of the areas that Walter's taken over, and then I discovered that I haven't been doing a very good job. So it you know, you don't know what you don't know, right? And so it has just been so wonderful for me personally to have Walter come and work in these 3 or 4 areas that he's responsible for, and bring a level of professionalism. He and I are quite different in terms of our work styles. I'm a little more laissez-faire than he is, but I really appreciate the fact that he loves the details, and those of you who now work for him realize that the details are really important. So I think it has been certainly to the benefit of me personally, but also to us corporately as an organization, to have Walter come and be a part of the team here. And it is my privilege to introduce him and invite him to come up and share what God's put on his heart for us this morning. Walter?
Well, thank you very much, Steve. I feel like I'm under a lot of pressure to deliver today, because people have been telling me all week and all day that I'm looking forward to your talk. When Bill first told me that I'd have to speak today, I protested. And I said, you know what, I'm not a minister, nor do I have theological training. But Bill's advice was really good. He said, just make sure you mention Jesus at least once, and then you're doing really good. So I took that to heart. Given that this is my first time speaking with you in this setting, I thought I'd use the time to share a bit of my life with you. Because who knows, one or the other one of you might share similar experiences, and that enables us to interact at a whole different level going forward. I think it's just important for you to understand where I come from. I mean, to Steve's words about the detail and all of that, there's a history to all of that, and maybe that'll help you understand me and my style and the things that I think are important for an organization a little bit better. But before I do that, let me share a beautiful Bible verse with you that, in my view, so accurately reflects what you do every day and what we do as a whole organization and the work that we do. It's in 1 Thessalonians 1, verses 2 and 3. And in it, Paul says, "We always thank God for all of you. Mentioning you in our prayers, we continually remember before our God and Father your work produced by faith, your labor prompted by love, and your endurance inspired by hope in our Lord Jesus Christ." And what was important to me is the emphasis that was put on these words. It's your work. It's produced by faith, by love, and then the endurance, the hope that we have in Jesus Christ. And I think that's what we do every day. At least I have known that, and and that's why I say I'm still relatively new, because as you look at all the processes and the complexity of us as an organization, it takes a lot of hope and faith to move forward, because there's a lot that we have to catch up on, and which is a good thing, because we are a growing and developing organization going forward. So going back to a bit of my background, my parents were refugees after World War II. My mother and her family were fleeing the Russian forces from Lithuania, where they lived at the time. My father and his family, they were fleeing Poland ahead of the Russian forces. And this is, when the tides of war turned and the Russians were starting their advance going west, that the fortunes of all the German-speaking people changed at that time. Because these were people not involved in the war, they just happened to be in the German villages in these countries in the eastern part of Europe. It's where they were raised, it's where they were born, where their ancestors were raised. They ended up living in refugee camps in what later became West Germany, and they spent a significant number of years in these refugee camps. They endured extreme hardship. For example, during this time, 4 of my mother's 7 siblings died and were buried on the run. My parents and their respective families eventually boarded ships in Bremen. That was the big port that all the ships were leaving to come out west, and immigrated to Canada. My mom and her family arrived in Halifax with destination Hamilton, Ontario. And my dad and his family arrived in Quebec City, and their destination was Niagara Falls, Ontario. And that's where my parents later met. They met in St. Catharines and were married in Hamilton, the city that I grew up in. My dad worked his entire life as a steel worker at Stelco in Open Hearth. It was the hottest place in the city, and actually in the entire factory there. For about 30 years, while my mom stayed at home and looked after our family, we were 3 children, and her at times ailing parents. So she was always looking after her parents and also my dad's mom at the time. We certainly got by. However, we were not a well-off family by today's standards. So, it was a day-to-day situation that we were in, one salary, and it wasn't a big salary. So I know what that's like. When I look back in my life, I'm truly astounded by God's leading and how he has brought circumstances together step by step, opening doors, providing challenges and opportunities. Obviously, this also meant that my wife and I needed to be willing to drop everything, often literally at a moment's notice, and embrace upheaval and uncertainty in our lives. But now I'm getting ahead of myself again. I always wanted to change the world and do something really exciting through my career choice as a first. So after about 5 minutes of deliberation, I decided to become a management accountant. And I marvel at God's sense of humor, because when I look back on my life and where God has placed me and asked me to serve, I would never have imagined when I made my original career choice that, that's what God had in mind for me. It was during this time that I met the sweetest German girl who was visiting Canada with her parents and siblings and ended up marrying her in Germany in 1983. So for the analysts among you, yes, that will be 36 years this year since we were married. One of the most memorable things our pastor said to us was that in life we would frequently be confronted with times of difficult decisions. And he said, you'll probably have at least 2 choices, and one will be a bit easier, one will not be so easy. And he told us that his experience was that when faced with realities like that, often choosing the path that had the more challenges would be the more blessed path in our life. And that is something that my wife and I honestly followed in the many years of our marriage, because we didn't always choose the path of comfort and status quo. We actually chose paths where we just felt that God was calling us and leading us in our lives. We have 3 children. Benjamin is the oldest. He is married to Deborah, and they and our 1.5-year-old granddaughter, Rebecca, live in Germany. Our daughter, Tamara, is married to Dustin McBride, and they and our 2.5-year-old granddaughter, Emily, live in Edmonton, so outside of Edmonton in Stony Plain. Our youngest son, Timon, recently returned to Canada from Germany, where he has just completed his vocational training. He's a specialty welder, and has returned to Canada. He's living with our daughter in Edmonton for the time being, and actually still trying to figure out what to do with his life. So he hasn't decided. And this is how the roller coaster ride went in our lives. We got married in Germany. My wife joined me in Canada, where I had started a job as a management trainee at Imperial Oil in Toronto. We were living in a rental apartment above a doctor's office, and his rule was no children and no pets. So when my wife got pregnant, obviously we had to look for a new home. And we moved to Mount Albert, which is about 60 kilometers north of Toronto. And we're there about 2 years. And it was at that time that I received a job offer with Supply and Services Canada. And this was for a procurement job in Germany. And so within 4 weeks, we uprooted everything, sold our house, sold our car, our appliances, and decided to move to Germany because we just felt, you know, the calling. And I always said, why would I not go to another country? Because I am fluent in German, so I speak the language. We grew up speaking German at home. So, and this was a domestic procurement job in Germany for the Canadian Armed Forces. Some of you might know that the Canadians had 2 air bases in southern Germany, in Baden-Söllingen and in Lahr, in the Black Forest. And that's where they were stationed at the time when the Iron Curtain was still intact. And so the Canadian government was also responsible for the procurement of domestic goods for the people living on the bases. I had the right nationality, spoke fluent German and English, was able to get my NATO clearance, so off we went. God's timing was impeccable. I mean, it all seemed like a little bit of a cog, and you know, why would you do something like that? But it's just his longer plan was different for us, and it was all these stepping stones that we just found in our life that God moved us forward. And he actually chose us to use us in a totally different task. So after several years in that job, I joined Kimberly-Clark. You might know their Kleenex products. And this was only a hiccup in my career because I was there only 3 months. And then I got a call one evening. This was from someone that I knew in our family who had visited our family before. And he was the CEO of a small publishing company in Bielefeld, Germany, asking me if I could come to Bielefeld, which was about a 3-hour drive, in the next couple of days because he needed to talk to us. He had just recently been diagnosed with an aggressive cancer. He was only mid-50s. And said, you know what, they've given me 6 months to live and I need someone to take over this Christian publishing company. Unfortunately, it was true. He only lived 6 months. So time was of essence. And it was at that time that we decided, you know, we'll pack up again and we'll move 3 hours north in Germany and pick up the job. At least that was our decision. So a week later, I was asked to come and interview with the board. And these were all older gentlemen. They were very well ingrained in their professions. And, you know, here I was, 27-year-old, very young at the time, and really no management experience to take note of. And I was being asked to take over this organization. So they had their hesitation as well. They deliberated for many hours. I remember sitting in one of their congregational houses for many hours, waiting for them to, you know, come to a decision of do they actually want to take me for the job. They ended up making the decision. So we packed our things and moved north. We ended up being in this mission for 13 years. And during this time, many astounding things happened that I never imagined that God would use us for. What very few people knew at the time, because it was not good to talk about it, was that they were using couriers to go behind the Iron Curtain. So they were not only publishing the Christian books, they were actually taking them to the underground church in Russia and Eastern Germany. Just a reminder that the current leader in Russia was the head of the KGB unit responsible for the most brutal persecution of God's children at the time. People forget that he was the head of that organization. And it was during this time that world events brought about the collapse of the Soviet Union. And here again, God's timing astounds us, because we had just published a reworked and older translation of the German Bible that was sought after by the German-speaking Christians in Russia. And at the same time, had a small 80-page booklet translated into Russian. The title of it was, "How Do I Find Peace with God?" We had all of this material ready, the wall came down. And then we just saw the opportunity, because the Russians were stationed in East Germany. So with the wall coming down, all of a sudden we had access to them. So through Russian-speaking Christians, we went and got permission from the commanders there and said, can we just come and put on a function for your soldiers? They're bored. We'll bring a choir, and we'll have something to say to them. And they agreed, which astounded us. So we took this choir and these people with us. And at the end of the session, because the Russian people, they do love music, it was quite a good choir. So they really enjoyed that. We were able to give them this little how-to book. And it was many months later that we started receiving letters from Russia, letting us know that, especially in one particular case, that whole villages were finding peace with God and coming to Christ due to the fact that they now had a book that they brought home with them. So that was astounding in itself, that, what an opportunity. We had printed 80,000 of these booklets, and we're distributing them far and wide. They took them home, obviously, and brought them to their villages. During this time in Germany, we also opened 2 Christian bookstores, which still exist, even in our digital age. We were always told that they will fail. It'll be good for a couple of years, but that's 20 years ago, and they're still going strong, these bookstores. We're happy about that, because what I tried to do with the message that we were giving there is open it to the secular market. So, this was not the time when Amazon was delivering overnight. So what we did is we arranged a service where we could deliver every published book on the market to a customer next day. So we were connected to that. We also offered small gift articles in our store where people would just walk in for the gift articles, and were then confronted in some way or other with the Christian message. And we got great feedback from people, because, during life there's all kinds of events that happen. And even if it's just a sympathy card that they're looking for because someone has died, it opened up that route for conversation. And we found that really helpful. So after 13 years, I felt the call to move on. And then God suddenly opened the door for me to join World Vision in Germany as their CFO. I served there for 6 years, and this was in Frankfurt, so we moved south again for a 3-hour stretch south. And I got the opportunity to implement a shared services model for them, also to repair some very strained relationships between the German and US operation. Germans in the US don't always get along very well when it comes to business, just a whole different perspective. And the key thing for me was that I could be as Canadian as I could be in some instances in relating to the US folks, and be as German as possible because I spoke the language and I understood the culture to the German people. And so I was able to negotiate that, and so that we could move the organizations forward. I was also the lead person for the smaller European finance teams. And at the time, we had startup operations in Madrid, Spain, and also in Paris, France. So we were able to put offices in place in those areas and to start the work that World Vision does around the world. During those 6 years was also a very difficult time for us as a family. My wife, who is a trained nurse, worked in a Christian psychiatric hospital. Working with mental illness, and especially young people in crisis, became too much, and she herself broke under the strain. Now began a period of about 10 years with very frequent and often long periods of hospitalization as she dealt with severe panic attacks and mental illness herself. And she has not been able to work since that time. So she volunteers many hours a week in, for example, thrift stores. So she was involved in Brampton, where we lived before, in a thrift store, Bibles for Missions, and then here for World Serve, which she really enjoys doing because, looking back, she ran the Christian bookstores for me, and so has great experience in those areas which she can use. She just cannot work full time. These are the times in life that we question God the most, because we often don't see the sense in him taking everything out of a person's hands. And, just this week we had the conversation, Steve and I, about, missionaries. Sometimes they come back and their life doesn't go as smooth as we often think it should go for people that have served. The Bible verse I read at the start, someone that has served in labor, prompted by love and endurance, inspired by hope. And yet people go through very difficult times in life that we don't understand. So coming back to World Vision, I decided to accept a transfer back to Canada in 2007 and worked out of the Canadian office for the next 4 years. It then became time to move on, and I was hired by the Canadian Diabetes Association. My parents were both suffering from this illness. And as CFO, I was their tasked with setting up shared services, and like here at the Seed, had all the back office teams reporting to me. So it's a recurring theme. For some reason, I've been used in the past decade at least, always to come up and rebuild shared services for an organization. At the Diabetes Association, what they had is they have the clothesline business as well. So I split the organization in two so that their business was able to operate better, and it's a $30 million clothes collection business. And they were also able to purchase clothes and then resell it through the thrift cycle. So I spent 4 years there and then moved on and accepted the CFO position at the Alzheimer's Society, which is a federated group of 70 organizations across Canada, doing pretty well the similar work and setting up a basic level of services for 33 organizations. And then I came to the Mustard Seed, and I think I'll save that story for another time. I just finished a book by Krista McVie. People, working in publishing for 13 years has kind of tainted me. I love books. And I do a lot of reading. I read a minimum of a book a week. And I just find that so important to keep up my reading. So I just finished a book by Krista McVie with the title Chasing Heaven, What Dying Taught Me About Living. I can highly recommend the book because it does change your perspective of life. And there are two quotes that I just found so relevant to the work that we do here. The one is love first and ask questions later. And I think when you reflect on that, that is something that we have to do. The other is, in the context of the forgotten and discarded, she encourages us to remember that they are someone's sons and daughters. And I just see this as a learning process for me as well, because as Steve said, I'm in the details, and that is part of my nature. And I want things to be structured. I want them to be explained and to make a lot of business sense. And yet I'm learning here at the Seed that sometimes you love first and ask questions later. And, it's this dichotomy of the two situations that I just see for me is a big learning, because you've got to find the balance in the things that we do and you see the people that we serve. So my word of encouragement to people here as well, that it's not black and white. There is the in-between. So what I also learned is Bob Pierce, the founder of World Vision, prayed, "Let my heart be broken by the things that break the heart of God." So thank you to everyone that has understood their calling and is investing their life so that others may in some way experience God's life. We always question God's ways and wisdom, and I think we sometimes just have to wait. I mean, there's a beautiful picture of, if you've been to Turkey or you've been to the Middle East and you've seen the weavers as they're weaving their carpets, when you look from underneath, that carpet, sometimes you don't make a lot of sense out of the pattern. It's when you look from above. And for me, it's been a very powerful picture of our life sometimes, where we're looking from underneath. We don't see the top and the gold and all the colorful weavings that are in there. Just a reminder, sometimes we just don't understand at this time why God is leading us the way he does. So let me close in prayer. Father in heaven, thank you for this day. As we reflect on our past and the wondrous ways that you lead your children, we want to give thanks, honor, and glory to you for everything. As we now go back to our everyday challenges, let us be assured that you see the full picture and that you are a good, good Father that cares. Be with us this day and every day that you have planned for us. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen.